He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I started to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cryptid Clues. I'm your host, Reuben Olson, joined by your other also host, Taylor Field. We're going to dive right into the episode today with a special report from Reddit user Holly Hot Dogs. And I begin with the quote of the title here. Heard my name shouted from the woods in rural Michigan. And I quote, "So I'm going to start by saying I'm basically a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. Although I love hearing stories and listening to others' points of views when it comes to that kind of stuff, this is why I'm having such a hard time understanding what happened to me last September. My dad, grandma, grandpa, and I were attending my cousin's wedding in a small rural town just outside of South Haven, Michigan, late last summer. We rented a small house in town, which was located in a very wooded area just off of a small lake. Something felt extremely off as soon as I got out of the car at our rental property. That's the best way I could describe it. Something felt off, and I was immediately uneasy. But, being the skeptic that I am, I shrugged it off and chalked it up to being tired and anxious. The night we arrived, my dad and I were having a smoke outside and noticed how weird everything sounded. It was about 11 p.m., and there was no one else around. The trees were crackling incredibly loudly, and we heard lots of strange animal noises, but nothing too out of the ordinary. Just the type of animal noises you would hear in rural Michigan, but they just sounded particularly strange to us for some reason. We said our goodnights and went to bed. The next morning, my dad told me that he went outside for a smoke at about 2-ish that morning and heard what sounded to him like someone close by banging on metal siding. He said it sounded like it was just next door, but didn't hear anything leading up to or proceeding to the loud banging, like footsteps or anything like that. We shrugged and laughed it off. The second night was when I heard the thing that I still can't stop thinking about 6 months later. It was about 11 p.m., maybe midnight, and I was having my last smoke of the night. My grandparents were already asleep, and my dad had just gotten into bed, but still awake watching TV. I was sitting on the stairs outside, with my back to the house, looking straight out into the backyard. I heard someone shout my name in a very abrupt manner, loud and fast. It sounded like they were shouting toward me from the front of the house, like they were standing on front of the porch shouting for me, knowing I was at the back of the house. It sounded just like my dad, but it couldn't be him because I didn't hear the front door open or close or anything. Being a skeptic, I reminded myself to stay calm, and I quickly walked back into the house. My dad was sound asleep. There was no way that by the time I got to him, he could have gotten back into bed. I woke him up and asked him if he was outside screaming my name. He looked confused and said, "Of course not." I started to get really freaked out at this point. I tried to go to bed, but couldn't get that scream out of my head. I was up all night, trying to figure out what happened. I was honestly contemplating leaving, getting a hotel room somewhere close by, and returning in the morning. Miraculously, I must have fallen asleep sometime around 3 a.m. We woke up the next morning, and I was so ready to get the hell out of that town. As soon as we left, the uneasy feeling I had the entire weekend disappeared. When I returned to work the next day, I told my coworker about the weird experience I had. Her face immediately dropped. She proceeded to inform me that this is quite common in the Appalachian area regarding cryptids and other types of creatures. Apparently, they try to get your attention by mimicking someone close to you, and when you look at them, they kidnap you or something along those lines. But I was in Michigan. I tried to look up information about the town I was in, but didn't find anything remotely interesting. Has anyone else had a similar experience? End quote. That is the entire Reddit post from Holly Hot Dogs. I'm going to let Taylor take over as he did some deep diving into the topic with this person and got some good responses here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for reading that. Stellar job.
Besides my one stumble.
What?
I stumbled like halfway through.
I don't think anyone caught onto that.
Oh, they will now.
So I did inquire with some follow-up questions. And again, thank you, Holly, for just taking them in and responding to them. So the first one, saying that you're a skeptic of the paranormal and such, how has this in retrospect affected that stance? After doing more research into it, she responded that the whole scenario has definitely made, and I quote, me question some things, which was sort of the reason why I posted my story to Reddit. I wanted to see other viewpoints on the situation. I still question the validity of cryptids, mimics, etc. I think partially because I didn't actually see anything out of the ordinary. My initial thought was someone must have been calling out their dog, whose name is Holly. That's what my logical mind came up with. I would say that I'm definitely more open to that possibility of unexplained creatures and situations, and I haven't completely ruled out that I experienced something cryptid. My next question was, your coworker mentioned the name calling by cryptids and such. Now, I've had many a person tell me about Bigfoot and doing this and vocalizing, even vocalizing a person's name and such. After hearing it being spoken by local campers, then it shouts it out afterwards or something along those lines. But then they often seem to try and like escort you out of the area. That being said, in cases where women are present, the women at times are the victim of an attempted lure. You'll hear the unusual audible vocalization out in the tree line, the baby crying, the woman crying sound, something that's just very innocent that will kind of pull you out. And it's logically in places where you can deduce that there'd be no infants, there should be no one out in this area. And that's something that in remote Alaska, that's a common thing up there. But basically I was wanting to know if there were more instances of this vocalization. She responded that this was the only instance of an audible vocalization. Like I mentioned in the post, there were other weird scenarios that played out, but that was the only audible vocalization that I experienced. That's just what she said. I followed up with Michigan. It's a keen place for Bigfoot activity and just really unusual cryptids in general. As your coworker said, what would the specific town name be that you visited near South Haven? And she said, we were in Pullman, Michigan. It's about 20 minutes northeast of South Haven, Michigan. We were off of a lake called Lower Scott Lake. The actual address of the house we're staying at, I think I'm going to blank it out here just for privacy reasons. I don't want to create like a wave of all of our listeners going to this property. But she had recently tried to find the listing of the house, but can't seem to find anything. And if you Google the address, you can't get to the house via Street View, which she thinks is kind of weird. She's going to try and get to the initial email that was sent to her grandfather regarding the listing. So she's still doing a little bit of inquiry regarding it. I asked, did your grandparents have any experiences there? And then also, in retrospect now, did anything further happen with your dad? And what would you say he was thinking after you woke him and told him of your experience? And she responded, my grandparents did not experience anything out of the ordinary. And my dad only experienced that one situation with the banging on the siding. And I definitely continued to wake him up throughout the night, expressing to him that I was scared. He just kept telling me everything was going to be okay and I had nothing to worry about. And in closing, this was in mid-September of 2022. So, like you said, first off, I just want to say thank you very much for letting us share this experience, Holly, and for answering my follow-up questions. And now I defer back to you, Reuben. What do you think of this experience?
I mean, going back to the beginning there, when it started with some of that side metal banging. That did really make me think of Bigfoot encounters and how they like to bang on the sides of buildings or campers and stuff like that. And of course, with the name calling, we'll dive into this a little bit later, as that's another common Bigfoot thing as well. It could have been another kind of cryptid. It could have been something completely unrelated. I just find it interesting that this happened in a Bigfoot hotspot. And Taylor, I've actually sent you a couple images over on Messenger here before we started recording with a Bigfoot hotspot map that shows all of the latest reported encounters in Michigan, and also a map of Holly's address that she gave us for this rental property. And if you look at the two closely side by side on the map, and it's pretty close to the lake area there, there's a dip. And right next to it is the address. And right next to that on the other map are a couple of dots for Bigfoot reports. That to me makes it seem clear that there's something strange about the area. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a Sasquatch, but the fact that there are cryptid reports there's something very unnatural about the area, which makes it a highly believable story to me.
Yeah, usually where there's one occurrence, there's something else going on there too. Very, very likely. And Michigan seems to be the place where weird things seemingly occur. I think that your map example here is absolutely fantastic because, yeah, that speck on the map and then the amount of dots just circulating around there is, oh my goodness.
And the funny thing is it's just, there's a couple of dots there, right? But the entire area, if you just go past that a little bit, there's clusters of reports and dots all over Michigan. Who's to say these things aren't coming down to the little rural areas next to the lake and stuff like that?
Well, that's just it. I did look at street views, and I mean, you've definitely looked at the same street views as well. I can see in this image here, and there's homes, but in comparison to a street view of where we are in Canada, out in British Columbia, like, well, yes, we're surrounded by woods, but it's not like this, where you go down this road and there's driveways left, right, and center, and it's just covered in trees like this.
I was going to say, though, as far as the U.S. goes, that is the most BC-looking place I was able to see in the map.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. Like, even if, like, going to your house, like, it's still relatively very open. And I'm not saying that it's devoid of anything weird ever happening, but it's definitely not really a road like this, where it's something could very easily just seclude. Again, things could hide anywhere, of course. There's lots of woods, but just being in a more remote area like this. But yeah, that's just peculiar.
Even out here, when you're driving up to the property where I'm at, there's those trees that kind of make a canopy just around the bend there. And in the past, driving home from work and stuff like that, there's been bears, there's been cougars, there's been deer. I had the privilege of seeing a cougar once, and I thought it was a raccoon. It's two little shiny eyeballs at the bottom of the road, and it leapt and hopped over into the ditch, where it continued to crouch until I drove right up to it. And then it did its little stand up on all fours, and I saw that it was a cougar, not like a small, tiny animal. That's because it had itself stomach to the ground. So even in a place like this, where it's fairly open, there's not a lot of places to hide, anything could just quickly blend in with the scenery.
Yeah, absolutely.
And somewhere like that, when you look at the street view, you could just step off the side of the dirt road and be hidden.
Yeah. That's something that's very prominent in a few different cases that I've read. It's where they're driving along, and how many times are you going to be looking in the ditch on the side of the road? I'm not going to be often looking in the ditch, but it's very easy for something to kind of saunder off in there, and there's the running water that's in there too. This is a few episodes back we did the food source for Sasquatch, and it's just, this is more or less just coinciding with the ditch talk that we've diverted to. But we're talking about the food source, and I apologize, I can't remember the name of the specific plant, but there is a edible vegetation that grows in ditches because of the rainwater and the water that's flowing through, and it serves as a possible food source for these things. That's why some people report seeing Sasquatch in ditches. The
hardest part with that plant is to break it off, much like this ad break. Welcome back, everybody. Oh, I miss doing those salty ad breaks.
Well done. Well done. That was great timing. Well, so I guess we can just kind of like let this segue us into like what do we think this is? And like first off, let's just again, like I said, let's get this out there. Michigan, more often than not, we always seem to come back to this area throughout many of our Cryptid Clues episodes and just the weird ongoings and creatures associated. But Michigan aside, I dove into the internet because I wanted to investigate what cryptids or general explanation might provide insights into this occurrence. And while some claim skinwalker, wendigo, downright paranormal, I wanted to focus on the specific entities that can actually make those like human-like vocalizations and words. Now, while Michigan is notably famous for its dogman that started back in the late 1800s,
The Michigan Dogman.
Michigan dogman, yeah, I've not found any encounter where a dogman necessarily makes human vocalizations. Have you ever come across anything like that?
Not in what I would call true dogman encounters, where it's like a werewolf-like creature that's just an upright, snarling dog. But that takes me more towards like the transforming events where there's something like a human turning into a dogman. That story time episode I just did, there was a lady in church that turned into a werewolf-like creature. Obviously, she was able to talk and say whatever she wanted to beforehand. And I've also talked about reports in the past in previous episodes, like the dogman that comes up out of that area in the carport, and it's trying to lure the kids in. Obviously, that one was able to talk. So it really depends on whether dogman is its own one unique thing or whether we're talking about multiple different cryptids when we mention dogman.
That's fair. Yeah, that's a good point.
I think I sent you a thing just the other day as well about a type of dogman from Europe that would deliver food to the hungry.
Yes. Just for the heck of it, I'm going to mention that now because I actually really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was super cool. It was just like a little panel I saw that I sent over to Taylor here.
The Wolver, Wulver, a werewolf in, again, I'm assuming it is Shetland. That is said to...
Yeah,
Shetland,
we'll go with that.
Yeah.
We're going to get ripped on later for our pronunciation.
I know, we're working on it. We saw the comments and we're working on it, I promise you. Yeah, it said to have the head, a wolf's head and the body of a man. And it leaves fish on the windowsills for poor families. Very generous.
Hey, that should do ye.
Yeah.
That's the comment it's leaving in the little panel there.
Very kind photo. But now that clearly is talking in that little drawing that was done. But so dogmen, depending on the variation, maybe talking, maybe not. We get to another bipedal creature that we mentioned before, Sasquatch. As we've already discussed, spotted in Michigan areas, clearly, they're known to sound off and repeat names to campers, like we already mentioned, eavesdropping on them. But again, to me, maybe that's a little too spot on. While in this experience, like you addressed, the smacking on the siding of the house did happen. And that is something that happens more often than not with Sasquatch encounters when people are in an isolated cabin or a camper. So... Now, I defer again, though, to the name Holly being called, particularly how it sounded like her dad when it clearly wasn't.
If I may, for a second here, on the topic of it being a Sasquatch calling her, just think about this for a second. What if her dad just had a really deep, gruff voice? You think it'd be easier for a Sasquatch to replicate that when they're known to occasionally repeat names? And you hear something that sounds like a deep voice that could be dad, and you go, oh, that sounded a little too deep. That was just slightly off. To me, that lines up with Bigfoot activity.
With the name, like, pronunciation being off, more gruffy, scruffy, is what you're saying? Yeah. No, I would agree. I would definitely agree with that. What I was hinting at with it not exactly sounding like her dad, I was using that as like a segue to another cryptid, which I'm curious if you've heard of the crocodile.
I have not heard of this one.
Now, we were talking about whether Dogman can speak or not. This is a mythical dog-wolf-like creature that originated in India as well as Ethiopia, with first sightings actually dating back to Roman times through artwork and ancient depictions. So, it has the body of a large dog and the head of more like a hyena, with a bit of a mane and fur that resembles almost like a tiger in terms of pattern and color. So very different from a kind of like a wolf, I guess, but unique in its own right.
Mm-hmm.
These have been spotted in the United States, especially in Texas and Oklahoma. And here's the catch. These things love to lure victims by pretending to be someone they aren't. They often use a voice the victim recognizes, and in some instances even calls the victim by their name, calling out for help.
Little Red Riding
Hood. There you go. Absolutely. These things do eat meat. That's the other thing as well. While not overly extending themselves to try and like get a human meal, they obviously have been claimed to assess the risk in the situation, and they will not put themselves in a compromising position, you could say. So there you go. Now you know about the crocodile.
I honestly, when I heard the name, I was expecting a crocodile.
A crocodile? Yeah, that's fair.
You think it wears Crocs?
The crocodile?
Picture a dog man wearing Crocs. Do you think he'd wear it with a little heel levers flipped forward or backward?
Oh, they're back.
They're back.
Ooh.
He's got it secured on there.
Yeah, I think they're back because the way, like, you know the term, the way their heels kind of come up. You know, this thing will help keep the Crocs on the feet.
Oh, I hate that.
Now, as I mentioned before, skinwalkers, they've been known to mimic people's voices and lure individuals away. But it's often noted how off the sound of the voice is in some way. The Fae, that's another option. Many are living all over the place in plain sight. We just can't see them, of course, or really interact with them. But except in these instances when they maybe choose to interact with us and maybe vocalize to try and joke or do something to lure us away. And of course, one that we actually talked about on the show a few months ago were crawlers, like the mimics. And these definitely really, really terrify me. And I still get sweaty when we talked about it before and when we watched some of those videos and just kind of like diving into what they're all about. Again, that video or footage is available online if you want to watch. And whether or not they're real or not, I don't know. This case can be made for any cryptid video out there in existence. But they basically look human and they sound human. And then when they get close enough, they just start to shift into something that is far from human. And notably, there's that one video of the people in this vehicle, and there's this guy standing in like off to the ditch, and they're like calling his name. He's like, oh, yeah, he's not making sense. And he goes down all fours, and he's like crawling towards them. He crawls out on the road, and he's not human. It's super, super freaky, and the guys just drive away.
Mm-hmm. I would drive away too. You know?
Oh, absolutely. It's the right thing to do. So for context now, on terms of the name calling, there's a story here where there's a group of 3 hikers, and they were rock climbing together. And the first climber was well over 40 meters up ahead of the other 2, out of sight, when all of a sudden his rope stops moving, dead still. Now this happens if you're trying to put a new like a stud into the rocks. I don't know the terminology very well. I'm not a rock climber, but you're trying to put in new clamps and studs so that you can throw a rope through and just allow your other climbers to come up and keep progressing up the rock. But that wasn't the case here. The rope just stopped, and when all of a sudden a voice yelled out some random gibberish, and the 2 climbers stared back at each other like, what the heck was that? The voice to them sounded closer to the ground and off to the left in the bush, but no one else was around them. And like the gibberish was some kind of like climbing the rock command or direction or something like that, which they thought it was supposed to be from their partner up ahead. Mm-hmm. But shortly after, the rope started to move again, followed by the climber's voice, which now sounded 100% back to normal.
That's
like his
creepy.
Own voice. Exactly. So there's a bit of a change there. Now, it could be a simple case of misunderstanding, but it's freaky. It's very freaky.
That's unsettling. Imagine if it like replaced him with itself and then figured out how to mimic him perfectly.
Well, I mean, you never know. I mean, are we talking like a demonic possession or something? Or a creature that was just like mimicking him?
What if it's still mimicking him to this day?
Well, I mean, if whatever kind of thing latches onto you, I mean, I don't think they're going to be shaken off pretty easily, especially with these things.
Mm-hmm.
But I have one more case here that is in reference to this. So it was a report from a hiker. He was out by himself walking down a road when he heard a woman calling for him, and the calls were to pull him off the road. He paused for what was going on, but ultimately realized and deduced that he needed to get out of there because of how weird things were getting. Like, this just logistically was not making sense with where he was, being very remote. And that just kind of goes hand in hand with, like I mentioned earlier, there are cases in Alaska where women are out at a remote cabin together, and then all of a sudden one starts hearing baby cries out in the woods, and they don't say anything. And then another woman will end up hearing baby cries on another night, and then they might say something, and then a few others like, "Oh, I heard those too." And it's freaky. It's very freaky. Like, what would be making those sorts of noises? What's trying to repeat your name and lure you out there? Like, yeah, it's very freaky. And I have to say, when I'm out with my wife hiking, I have like an extra set of eyes in the back of my head because I'm just paranoid. Most of the time, my friends, when they're with me, like, why do you keep looking back over your shoulder? You're freaking me out, man. It's like, well, if you looked into these
I do
things,
the same thing.
yeah, you'd be doing the same thing if you looked into some of this. It's terrifying.
That's exactly it. When we go out for a walk or a hike, my head's on a swivel. I'm always looking. And even in the distance too, like I'll stop if I have a clear view of like a valley or something like that, and I'll just sit there for a second. I'll look. And
Well,
I'm not looking for anything in particular, but I feel like I'm looking in all the different spots. So if there is something there, I'll see it.
you had that experience too. I can't remember if you mentioned on the show or not, but you were with your wife and your son, and there was the knocks going on.
Yeah, it was like metal banging. That was up by an old abandoned water tower. And we stopped. I heard the knocking, and it was like repetitive. Like it was knock, 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 knock. And it would stop if we stopped. And as soon as we started walking, even though this abandoned water tower was around the side of the mountain we were walking a path along, it was maybe a 30-foot distance down the path to take the turn, but it was a sharp turn, so you could not see around it at all. And whatever was over there technically shouldn't have been able to hear us walking. It's not like we were being loud or anything. And my son was quiet. He was falling asleep. But when we heard the banging, I stopped, and it stopped. And when we kept walking, it would start getting louder and more anxious and like repetitive. So that was when we decided to turn around. And as soon as we turned around and started walking back, it was gone. Like it was like a warning. The closer we got. Sorry, but carry on.
No. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, there are no name calls or names called out in that situation. Just the banging, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Although I would like to mention, growing up, there's been lots of times where when you're overtired or you're falling asleep or something like that, at least for me, I've had moments where I'll be just on the cusp of knocking out, like falling asleep. And I'll hear my name super clear, like in my ear. And usually it's a familiar voice, like my mom's voice or my dad's voice or somebody that I know saying my name. And I'll quickly wake up and I'll be like, huh, huh, huh. And there's nothing, no one, no sound, nothing. And then I'll fall asleep within like a minute.
Your mind is at that point where I'm not a brain expert by any means or a dream expert, but your mind is at that point where it's transferring into this other state of consciousness in a place where I feel like we don't have a very wide understanding of, and that could very well be an easy gateway into communicating or tapping into something around you that we are just very not privy to understanding yet.
Yeah, it's right at the point where you go into sleep paralysis. Like if you were to ignore it, you'd be in sleep paralysis if you stayed conscious.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got some statistics that I'm gonna relay on you. I don't know if you maybe jumped ahead here and looked as I shared my notes with you, but in the off chance that maybe you haven't seen these statistics, so you're in for a surprise.
Go ahead.
So Now, let's see here. Canada lacks clear national data on how many people go missing in long term. Now, this is basically getting lost in the woods and all that stuff. So it's, it's poorly managed everywhere, even the States and in Canada, sadly. So this creates a demand for more research to help understand why people go missing in Canada. And according to the RCMP, our Royal Canadian Mounted Police, from 2015 to 2018, approximately 295,000 Canadians disappeared. I'm going to pause. What's going on?
I snuck something in there. You didn't say it, though. You saved yourself.
Did you really?
Did it show up for you?
Oh, no, I see it. I see it.
I was laughing too much.
Yeah, I was like...
Taylor and I are sharing notes this episode on Google Docs. And we can like live type. He gave me editing rights on his side of the notes for some reason. So I just typed in a sentence that said, snuck this in here so Taylor would read aloud. But he didn't read it. He saved himself.
I'm going to break the fourth wall here because I have a Fitbit and I had it on my desk here. And I got a phone call just now. And so my watch was vibrating and you started to smile. I'm like, oh no, he can hear the vibrations coming through the microphone. This is going to be horrible.
Oh, I shouldn't have said anything and you might have said
it. Well,
that's unfortunate.
Luckily, it is not the case. We're okay. I snuck this in here
out.
so Taylor would read it. That's what Reuben put in there. That's fantastic. So yes, back on track. 295,000 Canadians disappeared between 2015 to 2018. Now, I'm going to start off here with year 2015
Which you had a wonderful typo on, by the way. You put the year 2057.
Did I do that, or did you do that to throw me off?
I did not do that. Okay. You're predicting the future, apparently.
2057. Yeah, all these people go missing. 2015, missing adults, 26,080. Missing children, 45,288.
That's insane.
That's nuts. That is nuts. 2016, missing adults, 27,786. So we're on the rise. Missing children, 45,609. We're still on the rise. That's nuts. 2017, we're now looking at 30,632 adults. What's going on? What is going on? Missing children, 168,000. That's a jump of like 2,000 from last year. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. Now, year 2018, missing adults, regrettably 31,387. Missing children, 42,233. Now that's definitely like a 5,000 decline, which is really good to see, but we're still clocking in at least 40,000 children a year. I tried to get some more accurate stats for recent years. I wasn't able to find them, but this is just bonkers. And what do you think of this?
And that's just Canada too. That's not the US or anything like that. That's nothing from over in Europe. That is just Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's insane.
It's appalling.
Those are so many, and that's a lot of kids.
Mm-hmm.
And
now,
you'd think that some of that's probably due to a lot of crime, a lot of trafficking. That's still an excessive amount. I can't see that amount just being purely human. That's people just legitimate, like walking off into the woods and being pulled away by something.
Yeah, and there are a few cases where these people get found again, which is great. But there's many instances that RCMP just don't know. It doesn't logistically make sense. And why should it make sense when you find the kid's clothing or the person's clothing in a situation where like this kid never would have made it up here on their own, or like there's something here from the kid and then their shoes are like 20 miles away. Like this doesn't make any sense.
We've talked about it before with the missing 411 and stuff, but like some of those cases where a kid gets kidnapped and another couple that are hiking up a mountain see a Sasquatch carrying something over its shoulder. Like they have a Bigfoot report. And then there's like a whole search party out for this kid or whatever. And then on the chance that they end up finding this child later, there's those reports where the children are like, oh, I was taken care of by a giant bear.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why would a bear take care of a kid out in the woods? Like, it's not going to feed you. It's not going to give you water. It's not going to protect you and keep you safe. It's a bear. It's going to either not hurt you or it's going to hurt you, and then it's going to leave you alone. So the fact that something was involved in protecting a child and that child can report it, that's so strange to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
you first. I'm breathing in.
I was just gonna conclude these stats here, where they reveal that more children go missing than adults, obviously, and more female children go missing than male children, and more adult males go missing than female adults.
Oh, that's weird. What a weird counterbalance.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that's the case?
I think that when it comes to hunting and getting out into the woods and stuff like that, yes, like women are hiking left, right, and center, absolutely. But I think in terms of men, just based on my knowledge, I'm not trying to allot or categorize or segregate anyone in the situation, but from what my understanding, a lot of men go out into the deep bush and they go out there and maybe these are the situations that they get into predicaments where they go missing. I think a lot of women are probably a lot more cautious and more self-aware when they're up in a national park or they're hiking or doing something like that. I think they have that extra voice in the back of their mind where maybe some guys in those instances don't. When you look at the 401 cases, it's usually a lot of men that go missing. They're out with their hunting buddies and they're just vanished.
Well, that would make sense too, because if women are being targeted more in general for like crime and stuff like that, you think that when you're going out hiking alone, you think, oh, I better not go investigate this mysterious sound that's off the beaten path. I'm just going to leave that alone. Whereas myself, if I was out in the woods and I felt fairly safe, I wouldn't be too worried about some random person trying to kidnap me. I'd be like, oh, what's that sound? I want to get a peek at it, right?
Yeah.
I would definitely be the curiosity that would kill me.
Oh, absolutely. It ties back into Holly's story earlier. She heard the voice calling out her name. What did she do? She went back inside. And I think that is a good reflection of this case here. Now, when you look at the children, more female children go missing than male children. I think that could be... I think that it could be maybe... how do I say this? I think, at least for me being a young lad, I was very much more like afraid to kind of like go out there, and I was very shy, and it was always like my friends that were girls were always like super like just like go-getter, like no fear, solid like confidence. And so maybe that could be the sense, like the curiosity, and you have something who's maybe like coaxing them in, and I default to a not necessarily like a Pennywise It situation, because again, there's Georgie and there's a few other kid victims in that franchise. But
Hiya, Georgie.
I feel like there's just something with like female children. They have the curiosity, and I think if this thing is trying to call out and pretend to be like someone that they know, I think that I don't know. It's hard to explain it. Either way, both kids, like, just watch your kids. Holy smokes, I can't stress that enough. Like,
it's hard enough just being in the store with my son, and he's like, he doesn't want to hold hands constantly. We go into Walmart or something to grab like an item, and I'll be like, okay, you gotta hold our hands. Like, you gotta hold somebody's hand. You can't go run off on your own. He goes, no, I'm Spider-Man, and he wants to fling his hands around like he's shooting webs, and that's all he wants his hands free for. But it's like, no, you stay close.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll force him to hold a hand, and he'll get frustrated. So I'll be like, okay, well, you have to stay right here. And as soon as I let go, he's like, gone.
Mm-hmm.
No fear. So he's a tough one. We're keeping him under control right now.
And when that's applied out in the bush, pardon me, you have to really make sure that they know, because when you raise a kid, and I think a lot of kids these days are raised in this situation where they're city slickers, you could say. Like, they're brought up in the cityscape life and they know nothing else other than that. And not there's anything wrong with that. But yeah, the outside world and Mother Nature, the forest, it's very foreign for them. And I think that it's very important to take your kid into the wild and just have them immersed and just kind of remind them of, we are just a part of the cog, and like, we don't have a lot of control in these situations. And if you are caught in a situation in the woods, like, be prepared and all that jazz. So yeah, I digress. I'm rambling, but take care of your kids. Keep an eye on them, especially when you're in the woods, because there's more than 40,000 plus reasons a year why you need to be keeping a close eye on your kids in the woods.
Yeah, and we're not out of the woods yet.
No. All that aside, what kind of concluding thoughts do you have here, Reuben, as we kind of close out?
I mean, honestly, report-wise for Holly's encounter here, it's so open-ended. It could be anything. We could go into the Bigfoot hotspot topic, and we could say, oh, it could be a Sasquatch. It lines up with a couple of Sasquatch encounter reports and stuff like that. You could say it could be a dogman. There's a few different types that seem to be able to speak. You could say it's something supernatural. It could be a ghost. Could be a haunting. It could be something outside of our dimension. It could even be like we've brought it up in the past where we've talked about ghosts and hauntings and how it could be like some kind of energy signature that's just overlapping with present time, playing a past event. It could have been Holly's dad saying her name, just not in that instance, and somehow it bled into present time. Some weird, trippy thing like that. It could literally be anything. She could have been really tired, 2 a.m., and almost dozed off outside and heard her dad calling her name, woke back up, startled, and then went back inside and asked. Like, it could have been something like that. It could have been a Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. Zero way to conclusively come up with a theory here.
Yeah. In my closing, some fun facts about Michigan. The animals native to the area: coyotes, foxes, cougars, river otters, beavers, bears, porcupines, moose, gray wolves. Michigan State has 6 national parks that it oversees. But of course, I mean, I doubt that there's any coincidence there, and just the fact that national parks seem to be a very mysterious place. But
some of the animals you mentioned, actually, cougars are well known for being able to emulate a human female screaming.
Really? I don't think I've ever heard a cougar vocalization in that sense. I'm going to drop a YouTube after and listen, because I know they do that.
And bobcats, I believe. Bobcats and cougars. People can mistake them for a very human-like voice.
It's that like not scream, but that like they don't howl. What am I trying to say? They like a roar, I guess, that like rah, rah, kind of a thing, but much more refined.
Definitely look up a cougar screaming, not howling, not meowing or anything like that. There is a definite scream that those, and I think bobcats do as well. That's when I saw that, I immediately went, oh, okay, this could be a lot of those Bigfoot reports where they hear like a woman or something crying in the woods. Mm-hmm. Could be something like that. More so a scream of fear, not maybe not a cry. If you hear like a baby crying in the woods, it could be something, but it's got to keep your ears about you.
Yeah, totally. Well, and with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Cryptid Clues. Remember, you can find us on our social media, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Check us out on the Patreon. You get ad-free early episodes. And should you wish to reach us directly, you can via cryptidclues@gmail.com. Thank you again for joining me, Reuben. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Remember, everybody, take care and stay safe.